Hello and welcome to the YouTube podcast series of Citiesabc and Open Business Council. I'm Hilton Supra, the Vice Chairman of Student Group. I'm looking forward to interviewing Leo Wortley of Future Networks and Ariel Seidman, the co-founder of Hivemapper. Here we interview people who are changing the world, people who are inspiring us with their achievements in creativity and acumen with the use of technology. In previous interviews, Dennis Guada and I have interviewed over 200 amazing people and achieved more than 14 million views with 128 subscribers on YouTube. This interview series on Citiesabc is in partnership with our platforms openbusinesscouncil.org and fashionabc.org, all fourth industrial revolution platforms utilizing technologies that employ the use of truth and trust through blockchain and the deployment of data analytics, AI, and machine learning. Today, I'd like to introduce you to Leo Wortley of Future Networks and Ariel Seidman, the CEO and co-founder of Hivemapper. So I'd like to start with Ariel, who, as founder of Hivemapper, which is a decentralized digital mapping network, and recently raised a significant round of Series A. He'll talk a little about that later, and has a strong history of success, having worked in many, many roles around the world, which include working with Yahoo in terms of the early days of mapping, and is passionate about mapping, which is basically looking at how mobile devices can participate and in terms of the mapping of our environment. Then we've got Leo, who's in London, and prior to his role, he had multiple senior positions, including business development in terms of working at Gartner and at Schneider. So welcome, gentlemen. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Ariel. What was your journey like? Where were you born and where were you educated, and what brought you to your passion today?
Oh, going all the way back there.
Yes.
I was born in a small town upstate New York called Ithaca, New York. Ithaca is home to Cornell University, where my dad was a professor for a long time. But really, most of my formative years were in Chicago, and grew up outside of Chicago in a small city near Evanston, which is where Northwestern University is at. So my parents are like, me and my brothers were all in business, we're all in technology. Both of my parents are academics, professor types. And so I think they're a little bit disappointed that none of us have PhDs or, very sophisticated graduate degrees of some kind or another. But, right out of school, moved to the West Coast and was lucky enough to find myself at Yahoo at a really interesting time in like 2005, 2006. It was still fun to be at Yahoo back then, quite frankly. And the reason it was fun was because Yahoo search had like 35, 40% market share, an amazing collection of engineering talent, product talent, design talent on Yahoo search. And 30% of all of our queries were location-based in some form or fashion, right? So of billions of queries every single day, people were looking for hotels and restaurants and, driving directions and information about cities. And all of that local and mapping data and geo data, we were really lacking. And so I was part of the team, or I led the team that was kind of like, okay, how do we collect all this data, right? And at the time, we just went around licensing it, right? So we would license from all these different partners, combine it into this one single data source called Yahoo Maps, and then feed that directly to users or feed that to users who were coming in through search product. And we had like 80% market share, right, in terms of the overall maps and location business. And then what Google started to do around 2006 timeframe, 2007, is they started to collect their own data, right? A lot of people think that Google's innovation in maps was really this user experience where you could like move the map around, just like by dragging it with your cursor. That really wasn't the thing that really was the distinctive piece. It was them spending ridiculous amounts of money. In retrospect, that looks like many money well spent, really collecting their own data and building up a mapping and local data product that was superior to anything else out there. And so at the time, we went to try to get money, to go collect our own data. And I think we went in asking for like $200 million, something like that. And the CEO of Yahoo at the time was like, I'm not interested, right? Like, here's $20 million, go figure out something. Like, he saw that we were like really excited by this, and he didn't want to like totally, destroy our spirits. But I was like, what do you do with $20 million? Like, you map like half of California and then call it a day. Fast forward to where we're at today, it's very clear that Google, owns the massive percentage of this very, very valuable mapping and location data. And they have many, many different types of customers. They have 5 million business customers. They have consumers who, obviously, that you and I interact with the map as consumers. Now they're monetizing that in a whole various kinds of ways. They feed data to the Google search engine. So it's a very core part of the Google experience today, used by 2 billion people. So I'm going to shortly summarize this, and then we can go into. So what Hivemapper is trying to do is say, look, we can build this map much, much more cost effectively by embracing this community of all these people all over the world, and with a dash cam that you just put into your car, you drive around like you normally do. That dash cam is then collecting imagery and other location data that it ultimately makes its way back to Hivemapper. Then we take all that data and transform it into a digital map that is much, much fresher, right? Because we're so much more cost effective, we can be updating that map much more frequently than Google ever can, right? The Achilles heel of Google is the fact that it's so crazy expensive to build that map. And so if you can target them by dramatically lowering the cost, then you have a really good shot. And that's a very kind of, Google entrenched approach that they've had now for over 15 years. So I'll pause, and then we can kind of go into that and talk a little bit about how Leo and his team is kind of working with us through this journey.
Brilliant. So Leo, in terms of your company, Future Networks, I love the name. So tell us a little bit more about this revolutionary wireless network approach that you're putting together.
Sure. So I guess to kind of understand Future Networks, you need to understand the space in which we operate. So Hivemapper and Ariel and his team, it's an amazing example of what's been coined TIPIN, which stands for Token Incentivized Physical Infrastructure Network Projects. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but basically what it boils down to is projects which use tokens, so cryptocurrency, as an incentive for people to buy hardware, to deploy that hardware for them, or sort of physical objects, and maintain it. So in the case of Ariel and Hivemapper, you buy the dash cam, you put it in your car, and you're rewarded for providing the mapping data with the Honey token. The wireless network that you were referring to was from the company Helium, which was, I guess you can consider them kind of the spearheader in this space. So what they did is they built a wireless network of radio devices. So they were called hotspots. They emit a radio signal, very long range. So if I could have one in my house and someone has one, let's say 300 meters down the road, it forms a mesh network, which IoT devices then tap into for exchanging data. So that's how our company was born with Helium, because we were one of the early kind of, let's say, people to set up the nodes in that network. Mm-hmm. And we realized very quickly that this space, the TIPIN space, is going to be hugely significant. And so this is how we found Hivemapper and Ariel and his team as another great example of a TIPIN project. And so, what we do at Future Networks, we help to grow these projects quickly. We buy the equipment en masse, we deploy it out to people for free, and we share the revenue, the crypto that these devices generate with the people that are looking after hardware for us. So I guess on one hand, we're helping projects like Ariel to expand quickly. We provide as much feedback as we possibly can, be as useful as we possibly can in that sense. And then on the other side, we're giving the devices away for free. So finding great, we call them hosts, and giving them access to participate in these projects where, like, otherwise maybe the financial cost to entry might be a bit too high. So there's kind of two sides to what we're doing here.
So Leah, just tell me about your journey, because you're in London. Tell me about your journey to where what got you interested in tech, and what got you to the position of Future Networks today.
Sure. So I say I actually probably started out as a linguist, funnily enough. When I was at school, I loved learning French. And then I grew up in Ipswich, between Ipswich and Colchester. So quite an obscure countryside. You can definitely call me a country boy. And for whatever reason, our teacher had a Russian teacher. So I then started learning the Russian language too. Really enjoyed the literature, the language itself. Went on to study Russian with management at university. And then post uni, I didn't really find any jobs in London. I went to UCL and then couldn't find anything in London that I really wanted to do. Found an internship actually in Moscow in a consulting company. So this is way back when, sort of before all the terrible situation we find ourselves in now in the area. But I went for a 3-month internship in Moscow, which turned into a 6-month internship, which turned into me living there basically for 5 years. So the company out there, my very first role was it was project manager within the consulting company, helping foreign, mainly UK and US companies to set up shop and expand in the region. And then, after that, I came back to the UK. It must have been around the end of 2019 and went straight to Gartner, the tech advice company. So I went into business development there, got super into technology and spoke to a load of the analysts there about, they kind of got me into blockchain, which led me into crypto. And that's how I found Future Networks through, an existing interest in blockchain, Web3 and crypto.
How interesting. So you didn't have any tech experience before you went to Moscow. How interesting was that?
Yeah, no, it's great. And so the company in Moscow did all back office functions. So we did like import, exports, consulting, legal, tax, accounting. But then we also did a lot of IT stuff. And I guess the closest thing would be sys architecture. So I did get quite a lot of exposure to the IT side of businesses during my time there too. And yeah, definitely a space I'd always been interested in. So Gartner was a great next step in that respect.
Absolutely. So, for a sort of a layman like myself, who, I understand all these, I understand the sort of the space of blockchain, I understand the space of technology, etc. But for the benefit of our audience, trying to understand the business model that you've put in place, which is the gathering of data to create maps. And the two companies, Future Networks and Hivemapper, coming together to create a product. One product being a dedicated physical device which you put in your car, which takes photographs and gathers data, and that's fed back through to create mappable data and mappable images. And I'm trying to understand that going down that route rather than just using general access to people's mobile phones.
Sure. So let me, before I answer that specific question, maybe back up and just talk broadly about like historically, what were the methods that people used to build maps? Mm-hmm. So there's the Google approach, which is, we briefly touched on it, which is a very expensive approach, right? We've all seen those Google Street View cars, right? Each of those Google Street View cars is roughly $500,000, right? So, the equipment, the car itself, $30,000, $40,000, all the equipment that goes on the car, that's the really expensive stuff, right? So 360 cameras, LiDAR systems, really high-end positioning systems, a ton of compute capabilities, storage capabilities. Then you got to pay the driver, then you got to pay gas, right? Then you got to do car insurance. It adds up really quickly, right? And so that's one approach. And they have, many, many thousands of these cars all over the world, right? But even with that approach, if you look at, I live here in San Francisco Bay Area, which is their hometown, they're only updating that maybe once every 12 to 16 months. If you go to, let's say, suburban Nashville, Tennessee, maybe every 2 to 3 years. You go to Lagos, Nigeria, maybe they're updating that every 4 to 5 years, right? So it's a very expensive approach. Mm-hmm. The other approach is you just take out, your Android or your iPhone, you mount it and you collect the imagery that way. Well, there's a couple of issues with that. One is, you're going to get very non-standardized imagery, right? Everyone has a slightly different iPhone or a slightly different Android. All that imagery is going to look and feel different. And that's going to be very, very problematic in terms of how do you then extract data from that, right? Speed signs, stop signs, et cetera. The other thing is when people are driving, they usually want to use their phone, right? They don't want their phone mounted, like a dash cam. They want to be able to play music, answer calls, do whatever they need to do, use it for a map for navigation purposes. And so the dash cam enables us to create more of a set it and forget it experience, right? You mount it, takes 15 minutes to mount, and then you just drive, right? You get back into the car the next morning, the dash cam's there, automatically turns on, and you just go about your driving, and it's kind of just passively occurring, right? And so that's why we chose a dash cam, is because if you want to be able to sustain the map, right, not just map it once, you have to continuously update it, then you need a device like a dash cam that is just physically present there and is integrated into people's daily lives, right? Like if you're driving, we tell people don't drive for Hivemapper, right? Don't go out of your way even for Hivemapper. But if you're already out on the road because you're an Uber driver, you're a Lyft driver, you're a FedEx driver, you're commuting, you're taking a trip, whatever it is, we would like to be part of that trip, right? And so that's the approach. Now that's from a technology and product perspective. Now, if you also look at how maps got created historically, Google obviously pays their drivers cash, right, to drive around or whatever it is. But many other maps, let's use Waze as an example. In addition to you and I contributing to Waze by using their app, whether you realize it or not, right? And doing reports, hey, there's traffic here, there's an accident here, all that kind of information. There's 30,000 people who are sitting behind a desk, very tediously editing this map. And when Waze was acquired, and all those people, by the way, are work for free, right? They're unpaid labor, right? And when Google acquired Waze about 10 years ago now, more maybe, all the employees made out as they should, all the investors made out, again, as they should. They put in cash to the business. But those 30,000 people who were editing the map, and there is no Waze map without them, they made nothing, right? And so they did not share in the economic value and the economic upside of what they were helping create. And I think that's wrong. Mm-hmm. And so what crypto does and what blockchain enables us to do is to actually share the economic benefits, right, the economic value with all those people who are out there helping us build this global map by contributing into it. Mm-hmm. So that's why we chose this business model and why it's quite novel.
And so you're working with Future Networks in terms of growing the mapping of cities and urban areas.
Yeah. So Leo and his team in London and the broader UK have said, look, we are very savvy in terms of operating a set of drivers, right? We can go find these drivers. We can equip them with the right dash cam. We can ensure that the dash cam is mounted properly. We can set up all these kind of fleet analytic capabilities. And we will then accrue, Leo and his team, a certain percentage of the honey tokens, which is the cryptocurrency that effectively confers kind of shared economic value, right, amongst all the participants. And they're going to, Leo and his team are going to earn, right, because they're spending time and money and effort associated with this. And then there's other folks. I mean, there's Leo and his team are doing a great job in the UK, but there's folks here in the United States that are doing similar. There are folks that are doing things, in Lagos, Nigeria, right? There's folks that are doing stuff now in Brazil. So there's all these incredible entrepreneurs and operators, like Leo and Future Networks, kind of distributed all over the world, who are kind of helping this project move forward much faster than it otherwise would on its own.
Indeed. So, from your perspective, Leo, from a logistics perspective, how do you make sure that as much of a environment is captured? Because if you think about people driving, they have a habitual routes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And therefore, you're going to have limited coverage because people have a particular habit of going and not doing side runs and rat runs and all smaller journeys off the main road. So how do you ensure that you get that distribution?
Sure. And I think also just take one more step back. There's also just regular folks like me and you who find out about the Hivemapper project, realize how awesome it is, and just buy a camera for themselves, set it up, nothing to do with me. That's happening all over the world as well. For future networks, we thought, well, what is going to provide the most utility? It's going to be novel routes, as you said, right? Not people just going down the same road every day commuting. So instantly you think of people like taxi drivers who are going here, there, and everywhere. The vast majority of our cameras are actually being set up with taxi drivers. And then we've got other, I've got waste management vehicles who also go here, then everywhere. They have different clients each week. They're going perhaps into the more industrial zones as well. I know there's other fleet managers putting them in logistics trucks. So I guess from a combined perspective, you get great coverage when you have a kind of a vast array of different types of drivers who are driving. So we focus mainly on taxi drivers just because they're driving the most, they're driving novel routes. But I mean, these dash cams get set up in all sorts of different vehicles.
So there's only really one that you wouldn't want to put it on is a bus. Like a bus that just does the same route, 30 times a day or whatever it is. That would be a bad place to put a dash cam. I mean, you can, there's nothing stopping you, right? It's a good dash cam. If you want to go do that, that's your choice. But in terms of really helping grow the map, what Leo mentioned there in terms of putting it on a taxi, putting it on a waste management truck, those are better.
Absolutely. So from a logistics perspective, then you move on to an issue of a privacy perspective. So all you're doing is you're taking content from the public domain, okay, number one. But obviously there's elements, there's people's faces, there's things like that. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's really important to us. There's privacy from two different parts. There's privacy from the perspective of what is the camera seeing, and then there's privacy in terms of the contributors themselves. So let's start with the contributors. We don't actually want to know who the contributors are, right? So when you create an account in Hivemapper, you start, contributing to the map and so forth, that we don't know who you are. So you don't give us your email address. You don't give us, your phone number. We don't even allow you to create your own username in the system. One is assigned to you automatically that's anonymous. And the reason for that is because we don't want to create a situation where anybody could potentially track you as the contributor, right? Or if you happen to be mapping in some sort of, government where maybe they're not as friendly and open and so forth, and then somebody comes to Hivemapper and says, hey, you need to hand over this person who's mapping, right? I want to be in a situation where I literally don't know who that person is. So that's from a contributor perspective. From the what does the camera see? That's just as important. And so there's a couple things that we do there. One is we privacy mask all the personal identifiable information. So faces, license plates. I want to go even further. We're not doing this yet, but I want to go even further and not just mask their face, but mask a large part of their body. And then the other thing that we do in certain countries, it is highly recommended just because of local laws that you place a placard on your car that says, hey, you're recording, right? So that other people know that you happen to be recording at that moment and collecting imagery. So that's what we do. And there will be even more that we do from a privacy perspective to ensure that, what we're not creating here is a massive global location surveillance system, which I think is, Google Street View plus, your Google phone is effectively constantly surveilling you. Mm-hmm. And it's very clear that Google knows exactly who you are.
Interesting. So in terms of the data, you've now collected the data, you're putting the data into your mapping, and obviously people think of the world and they look at the world and they look at your phone, and it's effectively 2D, 2 dimensions. But the minute you put a camera, you're now going into the 3D world of mapping the facades of buildings.
Yeah.
Sort of. Tell us a little bit more about the challenges you have now in terms of taking that now 3D data and creating these maps and, these digital geolocation environments.
Yeah. So we do create these fairly coarse 3D models. So, for example, let's just take a speed sign, right? So we want to know, obviously, what the speed sign is. So we want to say, okay, A, there's a speed sign. B, the speed limit over here is, 35 miles an hour, 60 kilometers per hour, whatever it is, the speed sign reads. So we need to be able to read the speed sign, utilizing the imagery. But then we want to know the position of the actual location of the speed sign, right? Mm-hmm. And so for that, we do create a 3D model. And then we're able to more precisely determine the specific location of that speed sign, and for all the other objects as well that are in the scene, right? So could be a utility pole, could be a bus stop, right? And so now we're able to also figure out the heights, right? So if there's like a bridge crossing, we want to understand what the vertical clearance is, right, for trucks and so forth. And so we want to be able to say, okay, this, vertical clearance over here is 13 feet or whatever it may be.
And all of this is done by individuals, or is it an AI algorithm or machine learning that you're using?
It's AI that takes, maybe the simplest way to say it is AI takes the first shot, right? It says, here's what I think it is. And then there will be humans that then basically say, you were right or you were wrong, right? And so the humans kind of course correct the AI when the AI is off. It's not like, I don't know, ChatGPT and some other systems where like, look, if you ask it like, hey, what is the size of this market? And they say 10 billion and and they're wrong, right? By, then maybe they're off by like a couple $1 billion. Like, it's not the end of the world. But when it comes to maps, you got to be right, and you got to be right like 99.9% of the time, if not more. And so we do need humans to correct the AI when the AI is wrong. Mm-hmm. But what we are not doing yet is creating the entire map in 3D. I think we will at a certain point. I think the issue with building the entire map in 3D is cost. It is, if you just look at like 1 road kilometer, it is probably, and this is not an exaggeration. It's like 20 to 30x more expensive to map 1 road kilometer in 3D than it is to do 2D. Like full 3D, right? Like what you would imagine, like, a 3D map where you can go in and see all the objects, and it's all very precise and it's all very beautiful. Kind of that level of quality is just exorbitantly more expensive. And the return on investment is not quite there. I think it'll take things like AR and VR and a lot of those commercial use cases to really mature before 3D makes sense from a financial perspective.
No, I understand. But talking about the business model and finances, if you, from your perspective, Leo, what is the individual who has acquired the use of an authorized cam, mounted the cam? What is the business model, and what is the utility or the value add for that individual to have that recording device in their vehicle?
So is the question basically, why would someone set up one of these dash cams in their cars?
Yes. Apart from being, I'm interested in contributing to the world and crowdsourcing, etc. But there must be some financial incentive or some benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the way, like, without going into too much details of like how the payouts are structured, the more you drive and the more useful the mapping data you're collecting, the more you're going to get paid. So you get paid in the Honey token. Some people might want to just keep that in their wallet and then have it as an investment that could grow over time. Other people might say, well, hey, I'm driving a lot anyway. I want to try and offset the cost of fuel. So I'm going to trade that into dollars, for example, and then cash out onto my bank account. So yeah, there's definitely a financial reward for people to be putting up the dash cam. And yeah, that's why I guess the vast majority, I would say, of people setting up the dash cams would do it, as well as contributing to an awesome project.
Mm-hmm. Is that revenue generated based on the overall commercial value of the organization's revenue model? Mm-hmm. So the more clients you have, the more revenues generated from that business, the more of that revenue is then pushed back to the people collecting the data?
Yeah, and so if you put yourself in my shoes, I'm evaluating different companies, and we're investing quite heavily in the hardware and deploying it. So we want to be 100% sure that the crypto that we get paid and the revenue that we're making is going to be worth something. And at the end of the day, the more revenue that's generated by the company behind it all, the higher the value of the crypto asset. And that's exactly why we're so heavily invested in Hivemapper, because there's a clear path generating revenue there. Ariel and the team are incredibly good at what they do. And yeah, to answer your question, absolutely. The more revenue that's generated by the company, the higher the value of the token.
Mm-hmm. And what could somebody, expect to generate?
Can I just add one really important point? Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions, and Leo kind of briefly hit on it, but I think it's worth maybe just going one level deeper. So we don't, like, a lot of people come into Hivemapper community and say, I drive 200 kilometers per day. Let's just use that number. A lot, mm-hmm. Right? And then say to themselves, oh, geez, I'm going to earn X, for every kilometer that I map, I should then earn X, Honey tokens. And the system doesn't work that way. And the system really focuses on three things. One is coverage. So within a region, let's talk Los Angeles for a second, use that as an example. There's about 120,000 road kilometers. And so what the system is constantly doing is saying, okay, I have enough coverage on these roads, the 405, the 10, Pico Boulevard or whatever it is. Now I need to move the Honey token rewards to other parts of the region that I don't have coverage in. Right. So that's one dimension. The other dimension here is freshness. So like if you just go up and down the exact same road, right, every single day, kind of like my bus, my bus route example, there's decreasing value in that. Right. Mm. And so what we really try to say is like, look, there's a road, you can only remap it every 7 days. Right. That's kind of the cadence that we would like. There's a lot of other factors there as well. But, what we always tell people is we're trying to create a network that's actually creating something that's useful to customers, right? If everybody just got Honey token rewards, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You could be like in some very, very rural area that rarely changes, that no one really goes to very frequently. And you just drive up and down the same road and you expect whatever to earn the same amount as somebody in London or Lagos, Nigeria, or Manila, it'll be a great little science project for 6 or 9, 12 months, but it won't create anything of value. Mm-hmm. And so, I think once people start to understand that, oh no, there's actual real logic here, looked at from the perspective of the customer who's ultimately using all this data in their products, then I think people are like, okay, I get it, right? And I think Leo's taken the time to understand that and then has aligned his network with what is best from the customer perspective.
Mm-hmm. So it's like a positive feedback loop. So Ariel and the team set the incentives based on the value that they're getting from our dash cams. Therefore, I deploy in the areas that it's going to be most valuable because I'll get the highest economic reward for doing so.
Exactly. What is the average revenue generated by a dash cam on a monthly basis?
Do you want me to say on
Go ahead, Leo. You can take a first stab at this, and I can try, and then I can fill in.
Or a range. Just give us a range. Just give me something so people can get some deterministic idea of the benefit of participating in these type of crowdfunding or crowdsourcing of data and the rewards associated with that.
Sure. And so it's still quite early days. We have a few dash cams deployed in different regions. And so for us, the key stat has been what is the earnings per kilometer driven?
Okay.
Because in some regions like London, Manchester, where it's going to be more useful mapping data, they're what are known as boosted areas. So you get more per kilometer mapped. However, in the center of London, you're not going to be driving as much or as quickly as, for example, somewhere more remotely. So in the more remote areas, you'll be getting much less earnings per kilometer. At current prices, it might be something like, I don't know, like 3, 5, 10 cents per kilometer. Whereas in the boosted areas in London, where you still can't go as far as quickly, it's going to be closer to, I don't know, like 20, 30 cents. The other factor to take into account is obviously I'm talking in dollar terms, whereas really we should probably be talking in honey terms, because that's going to be, giving you a better indicator. The price of crypto assets in general is volatile. The project is still very new, and nobody, I guess, really knows when it comes down to what the price of the honey token is going to be in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years time. So yeah, a lot of factors to take into account. But Ariel and the team have always been very clear of saying, don't go out and map in order to earn money. You put the camera in your car, and it's providing supplementary income for the driving that you're already doing.
Absolutely. But then now look at the other side of the equation. Who are your customers who are going to want to need to use this type of data? How do they benefit from using Hivemapper rather than Google Maps or other mapping technologies?
So the key competitive differentiators is, one is freshness, right? So in many locations over the world, we will be 24 to 100 times fresher than Google Street View, right? So that means is we'll understand that, okay, that speed limit over there was changed. There's now construction that's happening. So we're not dealing with 3 lanes anymore. We're dealing with just 1 lane over here. All of that information impacts logistics companies, right? So Pepsi, Coca-Cola, FedEx, DHL, you name it, right? Those are very, very, very large businesses. And one of these folks one time explained to me, they said, look, I have on a daily basis, whatever, I'm just making $250,000 of revenue on a truck, okay? Every issue that I encountered in my day, or the truck encounters in its day, is infringing upon my ability to realize that $250,000 of revenue. Okay. And so if I have whatever 5 issues, and then that's slowing me down by a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, that is X amount less revenue that I'm getting from that truck in that single day. Right. So when you put in that context, all of a sudden you start to say to yourself, oh, geez, freshness and really understanding what's happening, right? Like, hey, I'm doing a delivery right now, in Pepsi or whatever, to this, convenience store or to a grocery store, and it's all backed up, right? The parking lot is a mess. You know what? Screw it. I'm going to go to this stop over here and then come back over here later. So that dynamic kind of rescheduling on the fly to save myself time is hugely valuable, right? To some of these larger logistics companies. So that's one. The other is ADAS. ADAS is basically, it is a form of autonomous driving, but it's not like the robo-taxi, right? So it's like you go and buy a Ford car today. I think they have this thing called Blue Cruise. It takes over. It can get you on the highway. It can keep you in your right lane on the highway. It can get you off the highway. It can go like on major roads. Straight, but it's not going to you got to be driving in the driver's seat, right? You have to be paying attention. So it just makes that driving experience easier and more pleasurable. All of those rely on maps, right? How many lanes are there? Where's the side, right? Where's the bike lane, right? Am I allowed to be in this lane? How do I get off, right? Is the right-hand lane a turn restriction? What's the speed limit? Is there construction now that has reduced the number of lanes from 4 lanes to 3 lanes, right? All of that information is critical to maintaining a safe operation and also expanding the operational domain of these cars so they can just drive on more and more streets. Historically, building and refreshing that map at the cadence required was something that really nobody else could do, right? And so now we're approaching a situation where we are building out this massive network of contributors where we can actually provide incredibly fresh map to solve that problem. I can go on and on here, but those are two very large markets. There's also local governments use it, right? Utilities use it. What does that location look like? Office of Emergency Services right here in California. Hey, I have a problem over here. Give me your latest imagery so I can understand what I'm dealing with at this part of the road and so forth. So mapping is a very, very large market, but what I just described are some of the larger verticals within mapping infrastructure and the market that we deal with.
And what about overlays in terms of geolocation of particular stores or particular commercial outlets who want to have their commercial outlet mapped onto Hivemapper?
Yeah, so places is another dimension of the map, right? So like over here is a Chipotle restaurant, over here, is a Shell gas station and so forth. We're for at least the foreseeable future, we're less interested in like the Chipotle. We are interested in the gas stations and the electrical vehicle charging stations. And the reason is, and we would love to have overlays where you could see that and all that kind of stuff. The reason that we're more interested in gas stations, electric vehicle charging stations, even public bathrooms, is because they directly impact the driver experience. So, for example, if you're a rideshare company, you want drivers on your network, right, available to serve customers. If that shared driver needs to go to the bathroom, it sounds very mundane, but they have to go to the bathroom. Oftentimes they just go home. And if they go home, then they're just going to, go off the network. I got to make myself a sandwich and then I, grab I chill out for a little bit. I watch a TV show. I'm no longer driving on the network. So if you can help that driver find a bathroom and maybe if they have an electric vehicle charging station, recharge their vehicle, then you're keeping them on the network driving for your rideshare network. Mm-hmm. And so things that directly impact the driver experience, places I should say that directly impact the driver experience, we're very interested in, but not like the Chipotles in your local, pub or, local dive bar or whatever it may be.
I can understand. That's very interesting. So from in terms of the experience that you have, Leo, of in the UK, obviously, going as far north as Scotland and whatever, using the logistics network of logistic drivers. I mean, you mentioned big brands who are driving around all the time. Just as much as they're using the map, they must be at the same time contributing. So if somebody who's a user would actually have a dash cam in their delivery vehicle.
Yeah, I don't see why there couldn't be a scenario further down the line when people are both mapping with the Hivemapper dashcam and using the Hivemapper map at the same time. I think that's very feasible.
I mean, to me, that's an obvious one. Yeah. It's an obvious way in which you can be, they offset each other in terms of benefits and also a revenue generation for that.
Yeah, and I think in a similar way that kind of some features that Waze had, I know that the Hivemapper team is trying to come up with ways so drivers can, in a non-distractive way, maybe even update the map as they go. So I don't know if there's a road closure, you hit a button, a little icon, road closed, or things along those lines. So I'm sure that mappers can also be contributors in that way at the same time.
I mean, like in certain countries, it's illegal to use your mobile phone when you're traveling along. So some way in which you could interact with the Hivemapper with voice activation or something like that might be very, very useful.
Yeah, and thankfully it's for Ariel and his team to worry about these headaches, not me. But
Exactly. So at the moment, you're obviously mapping. Which cities are you mapping directly at this present time?
So yeah, it's still super early on. Obviously, the first Ariel, how many dash cams have been shipped in total so far?
Like 3,500, I think, or somewhere in the 3,000 zone. I don't know. We had some early production issues, but now they're flying off the production assembly line.
Yeah, so we're definitely amongst the first people to get them, which is really exciting. We've got some set up in London and Liverpool. We were waiting for a feature to go live where, again, without going into too much detail, enable us to operate the fleet remotely. That's just coming live now. So I actually had the onboarding call earlier this morning. So I can now roll out all the cameras I have, and they'll be going all across the country, mainly Manchester, Liverpool, and London, but actually, yeah, all across the UK even.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And in the US, what are you covering already in the US?
So let me actually just take it one step back. Like, you can map anywhere in the world, right? The system is designed as, blockchain permissionless, so anybody can map anywhere. I saw that yesterday that people are now mapping in Guam and Lagos, Nigeria, in many other islands that, quite frankly, I hadn't been familiar with them. So it's exciting to kind of see new names that I hadn't been familiar with. So you can map anywhere. There are 35 regions where we do want that density, that very, very, very high coverage. And I think, as Leo alluded to, they're going to have a higher weighting, right? So what does that mean? That means is you're going to earn more honey token if you're mapping in one of those regions, and you can see them on our website. So like Seoul is in the list, Lagos, Nigeria, Mexico City, London, Kuala Lumpur, etc. And what are we trying to do there? We're trying to ensure that those regions have well above 80% coverage, 12 months from now. Why? Because customers then feel a lot more comfortable buying in those regions, right? Like if every region only had 10% coverage, not a great place to be. And so that's one of the methods. But you can map anywhere in the world, and people are mapping everywhere.
But when you decide to choose a region, are there any regulatory hurdles that you have to go through in order to bring this to the market?
There are, yeah. So, look, it really goes back to your question around privacy. And so there are certain regions in the world and certain countries in the world that have much stricter privacy laws. So, here in the US, when you're out in the streets, there is not an expectation of privacy. And so you're allowed to collect imagery and you're allowed to build a map, and there's no issues. Now, in Europe, if you go especially to certain countries in Europe, like let's say in Germany, the privacy laws there are much stricter than they are here in the United States. And so there's a lot more disclosures that you have to do about what are you collecting, right? So for example, you have to have a placard in your car, like I talked about before. And then you go to a place like South Korea, a lot of their laws stem from really national security concerns, right? And so they don't want people collecting data and then moving it outside of South Korea. So any data that's collected in South Korea has to be kept locally there and served directly from there. It can't be moved outside of South Korea. So yes, there are specific laws because of the privacy, sensitivity, as well as some of the national security questions that anybody in maps deals with. I have a lot of people obviously who work in the mapping industry, and they work at big companies, like Google's and Apple's, and you always hear these stories about how local leaders are calling them up and saying, we want you to display this part, or we don't want you to be super zoomed in, or this border needs to change, like all that crazy stuff, right? So there's always this tug of war about maps.
This is very exciting. So tell me a little bit more just before we close. We've been here for nearly an hour. Tell us and tell the audience, if they want to get involved, how do they get hold of you, and what's the process?
Well, for Hivemapper, you just go to hivemapper.com. From there, you can learn a lot more about it. You can get involved. If you want to go deeper, you can get involved in our Discord community, which is the server or the place where a lot of people can come together, ask questions. It's totally open. You can ask questions about everything and anything. There's folks from the Hivemapper team there. There's also, people like Leo who have had a lot of experience with Hivemapper answering questions. So that's one way to definitely get involved. As Leo mentioned, you could just go to hivemapper.com and buy a dash cam and, you're not going to go maybe as ambitious as what Leo's doing in terms of building out an entire fleet and so forth, but you just want one for your own personal use, right? You put in your car, you participate in helping mapping, great. So that's how you can get involved in Hivemapper, right? That is the primary way. We also have a tool where people are doing quality assurance on a lot of the imagery and other data that's coming in. And so if you don't drive, maybe you live in New York City, you don't have a car, but you still want to get involved, that's another way to get involved. And then I'll pass it over to Leo, maybe talk a little bit about how they get involved in future networks.
Sure. So yeah, as I said at the start of the interview, so we're focused on this token incentivized physical infrastructure network space. We think that the likes of Hivemapper are doing a really important job in breaking up industries that are kind of been monopolized for a very long time, driving innovation and competition. So we're focused on all the different projects that we feel are really important within this space. So if people wanted to find out more about the kind of other projects going on too that we're focused on, the easiest way to find us is probably just to type Future Networks into YouTube. We're currently revamping the the website, but you can find a link on the YouTube channel too. And yeah, that's where we speak about most of these projects.
You mentioned Discord, but are you active on Twitter? Are you active in Facebook and LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm very active on Twitter. So you can follow me. It's just A Seidman on Twitter, or Ariel Seidman. You can search for me. Hivemapper, the Hivemapper Council is so very active. There's other folks from Hivemapper that are very active on Twitter. So yeah, if you're looking for social in the blockchain and or mapping world, Twitter is the place to be.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, just one question: when somebody becomes a member of the organization, the opportunity, I hope you make it easy for them, because not everybody's, crypto wallet savvy.
Yeah.
People just want a seamless way,
plug
and play, and they don't want to have to memorize massive, access protocols.
I think we're easy. I think we need to get even a lot easier, right? Mm-hmm. And so I totally hear that feedback. We're definitely a lot better than maybe many other projects that inundate you with, a lot of crazy terminology and stuff like that. Look, I do think, a lot of people, if you turn back maybe the clock 15, 20 years ago, most people had no idea what Wi-Fi is, right? Most people have no idea what 3G was, 4G, right? Most people know, Bluetooth was a foreign concept to most people, and people did learn it. I think, so people will need to learn a couple of terms, like a wallet, right?
Yeah.
I think that's important for people to understand, if you're going to be around this kind of technology, or if you're going to be interested in technology. But yes, I agree with you that we got to reduce the number of crazy terms and make the thing really simple.
I mean, basically, you participating in an operation to crowd source mapping information. You've got an account. In that account, you get rewards.
Yeah,
you don't have to talk about blockchain. You don't have to talk about tokens. You don't have to talk about things like that, because that puts people off. At the end of the day, you're going to make money. Yes or no?
Yeah, it does.
Doing yes or no?
When we go talk to businesses, who want to use the map, we don't lead with blockchain, right? We don't lead with crypto. There are some customers that are interested, right? They're like, hey, how are you collecting all this data? What is the incentive mechanism? And so they're curious, but fundamentally, they have a problem, and they have a lack of data. They have a coverage issue. They have a freshness issue. They're trying to solve some issue in their operation, and so they're very interested in hey, do you have the top 30 markets in the EU covered? And if so, what percentage, right? And when was the last time you collected? That's the question I get, right? I don't get the question of hey, what's your crypto wallet ID?
I know, I understand. This is very exciting to understand a little bit more about this fantastic project that you've put together, and it's actually working and it's going out there. But just before we close, bit of a blue sky. Obviously, everybody's talking about more 3D, metaverse, and things like that. How do you see the evolution of what you're doing today? And we touch a little bit on in terms of 3D. But do you see yourself becoming participants in that virtual reality, augmented reality space going forward?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I'm more interested in the augmented reality aspect of it vis-a-vis maps, right? And the reason for that is because you use augmented reality oftentimes outside in the physical world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's a better natural fit between maps, geospatial data, and augmented reality than there is VR, right? Where you're in your bedroom or wherever in your house and you put on, the VR goggles and you kind of go off into a different world. I think there are some use cases around that, but I think AR is it's a very, very natural fit. And I've seen this stuff, being utilized, if you're doing planning, right, for real estate, right? Well, you're just around a table, right? And if that table now has this scene of, let's say a real estate development or whatever it is, and people can point to different parts of that real estate development and talk about it, right? And that's very cool, right? Because all of a sudden the conversation is a lot deeper, a lot more based in reality. And people can move around the city like this just table. And there's a lot of other use cases, right? You're just walking around a city, you want to understand what directions, all this kind of stuff, where I think AR has a lot of utility. The dirty little secret is that in order to do AR really, really well, one is the positional accuracy of the data that we're collecting needs to be really high, right? And I'll get that into the moment. The other dirty little secret is that freshness, right, or the data needs to be incredibly fresh. Mm-hmm. So let's start with the second one. If you're telling a story, I'm just going to, where there's some sort of like lizard or other animal draped around a bus stop, right? And it's an entertainment type of story. If the bus stop is not there, but you still have this, lizard or whatever kind of, draped around a bus stop, it doesn't make any sense, right? The whole point of the story kind of loses its point very quickly. And so having incredibly fresh data and maps is critical from an AR perspective. The other part from a positional accuracy perspective is, standard GPS is like 1 to 3 meters. In some parts of the world, there's, urban canyons that can get worse than that for sure. So in order to do AR really, really well, you got to bring that positional accuracy down and, to like 20, 30 centimeters, maybe 50 centimeters. Because otherwise you're going to have all these objects that are like weird. Like you have this, this lizard draped on this thing, but it's not really draped on it because it's off by 3 meters. And so those are the two kind of enabling technologies. And those are two, I think, that we have and will continue to improve on both of them. Look, AR to like become widespread used by billions of users is still 3 to 4 years away, right? Mm-hmm. So we need the hardware product. It sounds like Apple may be working on something. Other people will be working on stuff. Then you got to get them out there. And then the technology needs to go through a couple cycles to improve. So I think you're looking at 3 to 4 years before AR gets, widely adopted.
And a great forecast and very exciting opportunity to be participating and growing your business into.
Yep.
Ariel, thank you.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
It's been really, really enjoyable. And Leo, really excited. And I want to, watch the growth and development of the distribution of Hivemapper in obviously the UK. And then given your linguistic skills and language skills, I'm quite sure there'll be other countries coming into your purview soon.
Sure.
Anyway, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time. It's been very, very exciting. And
thank
good
you.
luck with the project.
Thanks for having us.
If you're interested in knowing more about citiesabc.com with openbusinesscouncil.org and fashionabc.org, go to our platforms, as well as you can find me on social media and DM me, Hilton Supra, on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And do go to the other interviews we have done on YouTube. And don't forget to like and comment. Thank you very much for your time and engaging with us with this interview on Cities ABC.